All right. Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Michelle May. I manage ODOT's Highway Safety Program. I'm happy to be hosting, if you will. Moderating seems so boring. Hosting today's webinar. So welcome to session 18, called Time to Deliver, Rethinking How Ohio Delivers Its Safety Projects. I think it's going to be a really good session. What we've done is we've brought together some of the greatest minds inside and outside of ODOT, people with a background in safety analysis, project delivery, right-of-way and utilities, people with experience over the past 8 months or so working with our district offices, our local project sponsors, and the consulting community in trying to deliver our safety projects faster. So anyway, again, session 18, we've assembled some of the greatest minds. Just to recap today, we're going to have a series of speakers, and I'll introduce those speakers before each presentation. We'll hold all questions to the end, and then we'll bring everybody back up and hopefully have a good discussion. But what we really want you to walk away with, the concept today. We want you to walk away with the concept that there is more flexibility in the PDP than what you think. And as our Director Marchbanks likes to say, fortune favors the bold. And we hope that you will be encouraged to maybe think about some of these tools and techniques that we're going to share with you today, and take some calculated risks as you're developing safety projects, or really any project for our transportation system. Next slide. There we go. So the concepts that you're going to hear today really result from a challenge that the governor gave us last year. So last year, as the governor was fighting very hard to get the legislature to pass a gas tax increase, he basically said, if we pass this gas tax increase, we're going to go after our top intersections across the state. And as a result of the increase in the gas tax, we are now able to put an additional $50 million into our highway safety program. And we are now developing safety improvement projects at over 150 suburban, urban, and rural locations across the state. Many of those projects are under design right now. Next slide, Scott. And then in addition to the governor's challenge, the director laid out a very specific goal. He said, of those 100 or so projects that are under development, I want to set a goal where we're going to initiate or complete construction on 80% of those projects by the end of calendar year 22. Hit the return button, Scott. And spoiler alert, we met the goal, which is great news. Next slide, Scott. So we did it by holding a series of virtual workshops. So back in March, when we were planning these workshops, that was at the beginning of COVID and stay-at-home orders. So we really had to rethink how we were going to interact with each other. But we set up a series of 12 virtual workshops with over 150 people throughout our districts and central office. We reviewed almost half of the 100 safety intersection projects that are currently under design. And we did it by coming together as district and central office staff. Once again, people with a variety of disciplines, whether it's safety analysis, design, environmental, right-of-way utilities, and really tasking people with trying to come up with some efficiencies and some time savings so that we could deliver these projects more quickly. And from here, I'm going to let my co-host or co-presenter today pick up the story. And while he's getting prepared to make his remarks, let me give you just a brief bio. So Scott is actually a longtime friend of ODOT safety program. He's been working with us going all the way back to the early 2000s. He is currently Vice President of Crawford, Murphy, and Tilley, and serves as the Ohio Surface Transportation Group Manager. He has more than 28 years of planning and design experience, applying performance-based practical design concepts on projects ranging from interstate to local roads, as well as urban and rural environments. He leverages national best practices and emerging safety research to identify innovative solutions. He's also a graduate of the University of Dayton. So Scott, I will let you pick up the story from here.
Great. Thank you very much, Michelle. Appreciate the opportunity to speak to everyone today. So in looking at the workshops in particular, there was a lot of discussion, but what I want to focus on today are two areas that were really a focus of those workshops, and I present them today in the form of two questions. So the first one is, how can the current PDP be applied in a way to reduce project schedules? So project schedules are important. Clearly, from the safety program perspective, if we can get safety improvements constructed faster, then obviously the public benefits from those safety improvements. So maybe more so than a typical maintenance type of project, schedules are important. Now, a part of the discussion was that we did not want this to be just the answer defaulting to let's quote run faster. The idea was that for this to be a sustainable program is that we are wanting to try to find ways to modify the process that would result in shorter project timelines. So while we can run faster, reduce review timelines, design quicker, we really wanted to focus on the PDP process itself. So the strategy was to identify those tasks that can be completed concurrently to be able to reduce those timelines. So I think one of the takeaways, the biggest takeaways from this process was a stronger or more significant realization that the PDP process is flexible. So a couple quotes from the PDP manual itself indicates that project managers do have flexibility in developing the scope, and the PDP process is not a 100% linear process. So I believe the word "not" actually is underlined in the manual. Granted, the PDP process is structured, and there are benefits in following that structure, but I think as a result of the workshops, there was, again, a greater appreciation. I think some of the presentations later in this session will share some of those perspectives of where, with a little tweaking of the PDP process, we're able to actually gain some benefits from a project schedule perspective. There is a recognition that there is risks associated with this, but I think it's incumbent upon not only the project manager, but I stress the fact that it does take the entire team to be able to implement this and manage those risks if you do apply some of the creative opportunities that the PDP provides. So just a real quick touch on what some of these schedule reduction tools might look like. One is purchasing of signal supports. So we have a couple projects here recently that has taken advantage of this particular tool, first proposed by District 8, and I know has been used in other locations, have considered it on other projects and not used for various reasons. So purchasing signal supports early is one. Conducting a design charrette with the LPA. So if you do have a local government agency involved, oftentimes comments coming from various stakeholders will often conflict. Encouraged to actually pull everybody together and resolve those in a timely fashion. Another is just reducing the number of formal submittals. And in this case, we say from 4 to 2. Again, recent project, fairly straightforward project in District 10, where we're looking at actually reducing it to a 2 submittal process. And the last one, I couldn't put enough asterisks on this one in particular, but just wanted to show the extent of how big the box was when we were talking about options. And one was actually allowing right-of-way acquisition to be completed after project sale. So Drew may have some opinions about that, but again, not necessarily saying that is a feasible option for most projects, but just shows the extent of how significant the various tools were considered when working through this process. The other item that I would share with the group that was a focus of the workshops was a discussion about primary and secondary countermeasures. So the second question that was addressed was, are the solutions or the countermeasures that increases the schedule critical to the safety goals of the project? So primary and secondary countermeasure discussion was a focus, and this not only has schedule implications, but it also has cost implications. So the strategy was to limit those solutions to primary countermeasures to help expedite the safety benefits of the project. So clearly, if a primary countermeasure does warrant, additional environmental or property acquisition, which may lengthen a typical safety project, then by all means, the goal is to implement those countermeasures that make the most, or provide the most benefit. I think what was a focus, though, was those secondary countermeasures, and those can be introduced a couple of ways. Clearly, from in the study phase, there may be some countermeasures that are proposed, some that may be more effective than others, but a scenario that does occur is where once the study is completed and it goes to design, there are often questions asked that says, well, why aren't we doing X, Y, or Z as a part of this safety program or this safety project that should be addressed? And while most studies will identify the countermeasures 1, 2, 3, 4, a lot of times the safety study may not necessarily identify those things that are not to be done, which could be 5, 6, 7, 8 on the list. So there's an inherent, using the word scope creep, that can occur that oftentimes makes a lot of sense, but may not be critical to the project. And in particular, if those secondary countermeasures have significant cost and schedule implications, those are the ones that I think not only as a part of the workshop exercise, but also part of the normal safety program will be a focus to make sure that we are focusing on the true safety benefits of a project. So this is a matrix that helps try to explain or demonstrate this secondary primary issue. This is an actual project. The project itself isn't important, but on the top row, it just shows some various typical countermeasures that may be considered, and on the left column it shows the various crash types, and there's an assignment made that is it a primary countermeasure or is it a secondary. And I think a couple takeaways from this example is that clearly the goal is to have most of the countermeasures be primary, but there is an occasional secondary countermeasure that still may be included as a part of the preferred alternative that is still a part of the program. It's constructed if it doesn't necessarily have a significant cost or has a significant schedule impact. And on this particular project, what is interesting or was interesting was that the reprofile option on the far left side of that table was actually probably one of the more effective countermeasures. Just it was prohibitively costly for a 5-lane arterial on an urban corridor. So looking for other countermeasures that were still effective from a safety perspective, but not as impactful. So just a real quick rundown on a few examples to demonstrate this primary secondary issue. One deals with a right-of-way. So on this particular project, the countermeasure was the construction of an exclusive right turn lane, actually on 2 approaches. And on the one that you see on the screen now, shows a scenario where we actually had proposed the right turn lane, but we also proposed not constructing it to a 20-year design level, such that it was even longer than what was shown. And part of the concern was this particular parcel in the lower part of the screen, where you can kind of see, but this was actually a service area with garage doors, and cars would queue before entering the building. And the concern was, by extending that right turn lane, would we be introducing impacts on this parcel that may not necessarily achieve a comparable level of safety benefit. And one of the reasons that factored into the decision was on the table in the upper right-hand corner, it does show a comparison between volumes and the crash frequency. And a takeaway was the fact that as volumes build and as they peak in the PM peak period, the corresponding crashes did not match that. So the decision was an exclusive right turn lane was beneficial, maybe not building it to a 20-year standard was required. Another example of primary and secondary, the primary safety countermeasure is on the right-hand side of the screen, was the extension of these dual left turn lanes. There's a signalized intersection just off to the right of the screen. So the desire was to provide more storage and not have queues extend through the adjacent traffic signal. And another countermeasure was, as a part of this, was a narrow median that was constructed as well, resulting in this driveway being converted to effectively a right in, right out on the right side of the screen. All these improvements were being done within the existing curb limits, so there was not right-of-way impacts or impacts beyond the existing right-of-way line. A question was asked as a part of the scope about this quadrant. It's the southeast quadrant of the intersection. We did show reconstructing this curb in this area to provide a little bit more space for this new signal support and to try to minimize the stop line to signal head distance. But as a part of this reconstruction, we did not remove the access point. And clearly this access point does not meet any guidelines in the State Highway Access Manual. However, there were no crashes attributed to this access point, such that the additional cost and additional coordination with this particular property to actually remove this access, the decision was not a primary safety improvement at this particular location. Another example dealing with pedestrian access. So this is an intersection of two rural state highways, of which there are no pedestrian accommodations on either roadway. However, the safety countermeasure was a typical reconstruct the traffic signal, provide back plates, and mount these signal heads on the far side of the intersection. The existing design was a diagonal, such that left turners did not have a good view of the signal head when turning left permissively. What the scope of the improvements did not include were pavement upgrades. And what you show is, as part of the design detail, setting poles to avoid impacts caused by turning trucks, but not necessarily resulting in a pavement upgrade project. So the decision here was, we did want to accommodate pedestrians better in the form of having pedestrian signal heads, but the decision was to move forward with a minimum PED timing on both approaches, such that the volumes on these roadways were fairly equal. So there really wasn't a major or minor street to favor one versus another, and did not necessarily then require the additional concrete sidewalk and ramp construction that typically would be required to accommodate pedestrians at this location. So there was no need for buttons or access to buttons to be able to accommodate the pedestrian elements. And the last example is an interstate project. to where the focus of the safety countermeasure was to look at lane utilization and road departure crashes that were attributed to these directional loop ramps at this interchange. As a part of the study, it was identified at the top end, there was a bridge structure of which there was a vertical clearance issue. It did not meet design criteria. But as part of the study, it was determined that while it did not meet criteria, there were not crashes attributed to that vertical clearance issue. So from a primary, secondary countermeasure perspective was that the safety improvement focused on these directional ramps, and it did not address the existing vertical clearance issue. So with that, that is the extent that I share with everyone, and we'll have more examples of that resulted from the workshop.
Great, thank you, Scott. Once again, if you have questions as we proceed throughout the presentations, go ahead and put them in the question box, and we'll bring all the speakers back at the end and try and address those questions. So as Scott turns it over to our next speaker, who is Brent Bogard, I will introduce him. So many of you should know Brent. He's the administrator of ODOT's Office of Roadway Engineering. He holds a Bachelor of Science degree in Civil Engineering from The Ohio State University, and he's a professional engineer in Ohio. His presentation is Thinking Strategically About Project Design, in which he's going to share some examples of how practical design principles can be used to make targeted safety improvements and reduce project risk to schedule and budget. So with that, I turn it over to Brent. Thank you.
All right, can you hear me, see my slides?
You can.
All right. Well, thank you, Michelle, for the introduction. As Michelle said, I'll be covering the concept of PBPD and how it can provide the flexibility planners and designers need to strategically address project challenges. So what is PBPD? Performance-based project development is covered in ODOT's Location and Design Volume 1, Section 1000. PBPD is less about strict adherence to the standards and more about targeting improvements based on project-specific needs. It relies on safety and operational performance measures to support the improvement. The goal of PBPD is to right-size the project scope and engineering decisions to fix what is broken through the application of data analysis and engineering judgment. PBPD is not practical design. Practical design is design-centric, where the outcome is often a design exception. PBPD is more than that, and opportunities to implement PBPD strategies should be investigated throughout the PDP, including when developing the purpose and need, scoping a project, or completing alternative evaluations. This table indicates how the culture of PBPD differs from the traditional design approach. At scoping, PBPD looks to fix what is broken, not everything that isn't meeting standards. In the past, a project's success was defined by whether it met all of the standards, and PBPD success is defined by whether it improves upon the existing condition in a thoughtful and careful manner. PBPD uses tools such as design exceptions, the highway safety manual, capacity analysis, cost estimates, right-of-way impacts, all to document a thoughtful and sound decision. Design exceptions are not a bad thing. In the past, vehicular-centric design was the way of thinking. Implementing PBPD means thinking about all modes and considering the surroundings to determine if the solution makes sense for everyone, including vehicles, freight, bike, peds, and transit. PBPD uses the Highway Safety Manual, or HSM, to measure and predict the safety performance of the decisions being made. The HSM allows for a designer to quantify the impacts to safety that each alternative has. The most important benefit PBPD has over traditional design approaches is that it can yield an affordable solution that could be implemented now, instead of creating a solution that, while may meet all the standards, becomes so costly that nothing can be done until funding is available. PBPD can occur throughout the project development process, or PDP. The decisions related to PBPD should consider and balance the benefits, disadvantages, costs, and impacts. And there are several key tenets to PBPD. First and foremost, safety will not be compromised. With the ability to quantify the impacts and measure the benefit of mitigation strategies, solutions should introduce and not exacerbate a safety issue. For PBPD strategies, the existing condition is often the minimum standard, and the project will look to improve upon the existing condition. The project's purpose and need should address specific problems supported by data, and the design should adhere to the purpose and need. The PBPD solution should be consistent with the context of the corridor that maximizes the benefit-cost ratio as an optimized combination of mobility operations and other modes. So let's break down the PDP and identify how PBPD can be implemented in each phase. In planning, PBPD establishes the need for a project by focusing on improving the critical items and not those that aren't impacting safety or operations. And this becomes the framework for defining two different needs for a project, which Scott covered in his presentation as well. But the primary needs are those elements that are truly causing the problem. The project must address these to the greatest extent possible. Secondary needs are those elements that may not meet standards but are not causing undue issues. And the project may or may not address these depending on cost or impacts created by addressing them. It is very important during scoping that these needs are identified and the delineation between primary and secondary needs for the project are well defined. There are several opportunities to implement PBPD during planning. Adjusting the design year for the project can offer beneficial solutions, especially when the growth projections come with a lot of uncertainty or if there is an opportunity to phase a solution. This can lead to adjustments to the design traffic volumes as well. Design speed is another aspect that can be investigated to be modified for a project depending on the context of the adjacent corridor. During preliminary engineering, PBPD can be implemented during the feasibility study and alternatives evaluation report or AER phases. As a reminder of ODOT's PDP, the feasibility study and AER are used to evaluate alternatives to address the purpose and need, including impacts and costs associated with addressing the secondary needs. PBPD decisions should be made in collaboration with all the appropriate disciplines, process owners, and approvers to avoid making any fatal flaw decisions and having to backtrack later in the process. So this is the time to ensure that ODOT's Office of Roadway Engineering, Safety, and Environmental Services at a minimum are engaged and on board with the decisions being made. During preliminary engineering, as alternatives are being evaluated, designers can evaluate opportunities to introduce PBPD strategies in these three categories. Operational performance could mean adjusting level of service requirements or modifying access control requirements near an interchange. Alternatives could mean evaluating different facility types or introducing unconventional or alternative intersections in lieu of grade separations and interchanges. Geometrics could mean evaluating different ramp terminal spacing opportunities, addressing inside merges, or removing left exit or entrance ramps. At this stage, the designer and team need to decide what is practical for the project to address. In the design phase of the PDP, it requires a departure from the traditional mentality that said meeting design standards was a metric of measuring success. While meeting standards is a worthwhile goal, the cost of meeting all the standards may be prohibitively expensive or impactful. During design, PBPD opportunities include adjustment to the typical section, median width, cross slope, entrance and exit ramp geometry, grading, storage lengths, and many others. These are all areas that can be evaluated based on the crash history to determine if they need to be improved from the existing condition and to the degree at which they need to be improved. During this phase of the PDP, documentation is critical. All deviations from the standard should be based on sound engineering judgment and be well documented. This is normally done through the design exception process. Design exceptions are the formal approval process to evaluate and document decisions when deviating from the controlling criteria. And when thinking about PBPD and controlling criteria, don't just jump straight to a design exception without thinking through the possible solutions that could be implemented. And it should be noted that deviations from non-controlling criteria should also be evaluated and documented throughout the project development. So we have ways of determining the impacts of every decision we're making now using highway capacity analysis software, the highway safety manual, vehicle tracking and lane keeping software, and traffic simulation models. PBPD is not the complete disregard of the standards. It is not always violating standards because it's cheaper. It is understanding safety ramifications for different decisions that are made during the project. What impacts do you avoid that allows you to determine the benefit-cost ratio? Are you still meeting the purpose and need? And does meeting the standards fit the context? When selecting a PBPD solution, analyses should be conducted to compare the safety performance of the PBPD solution with the existing condition. Using the HSM, the predicted or expected crash frequencies can be compared to the existing and PBPD conditions. In general, it's not desirable to have an increase in crashes as a result of the PBPD solution. However, if the increase is only in property damage only crashes, it may be an acceptable solution. If fatal or injury crashes are increased over the existing conditions, other countermeasures should be explored to further reduce those types of crashes. And countermeasures should be evaluated until the proposed solution has fewer fatal and injury crashes than the existing condition. Section 1003 of L&D Volume 1 provides several potential secondary needs that PBPD can look to address, including geometric opportunities such as the conversion of a left-hand ramp to a right-hand ramp, widening the shoulder on the outside of a horizontal curve to standard width, improving the vertical clearance, improving super elevation rate, or incorporating strategies to manage access through the inclusion of medians or right-in, right-out islands. PBPD strategies to improve capacity could be reducing the level of service criteria to improve the capacity of the corridor over the existing, but not to the preferred performance metric, reducing the design year horizon to less than 20 years, or investigating a phased approach that implements an alternative intersection in the short term rather than an interchange that may be ultimately required. So get into a few examples. Here's an example in Greene County along US 35 where an interim solution was proposed while funding for the full build alternative is being obtained. The ultimate fix at these two at-grade intersections is a $120 million grade separation interchanges project. That kind of money just isn't available. An interim solution that was recommended as part of PBPD process was the implementation of a super street. This super street concept was far superior to the existing condition when measuring traffic operations and safety performance, but it wasn't as good as the interchange concept. But the super street was estimated to cost $15 million. So is it better to make a lesser improvement now or do nothing while we wait for money to appear? Projects that address bottlenecks are good opportunities to investigate PBPD solutions. Bottlenecks are capacity constraints typically due to not enough through lanes or poor lane continuity along a roadway, often over a short segment. PBP opportunities include utilizing less than standard lane widths, shoulder widths, or barrier offsets to squeeze in an additional lane. So here's an example of a bottleneck project in Akron. To improve this segment by widening to 3 lanes in each direction to meet standards would require the reconstruction of the entire interchange, including the middle and top level bridges, which would have cost about $90 million to implement. A PBPD strategy was evaluated to reduce lane widths and shoulder widths through this section to squeeze in the additional lane. Understanding the context of the project, the geometrics in the crash history led to this proposed solution. With this being a tangential alignment, the narrow lanes aren't expected to cause lane departure or off-tracking issues for trucks. The existing shoulders don't provide emergency pull-off areas, and neither will the proposed. Narrowing the proposed shoulder widths doesn't reduce the horizontal stopping sight distance, and the cost to squeeze in this additional lane was $5 million. Here's another example of a bottleneck project in Cleveland. This is along a 3-mile stretch of Interstate 480 that had significant congestion and safety issues. Adding an additional lane of capacity using traditional widening strategies that meet design standards would have required $50 million due to the number of bridges and interchanges in the corridor. A PBP strategy identified reducing the travel lane width from 12 feet to 11.5 feet and reducing the shoulder width to squeeze in the additional lane. The exit gore was reconfigured to include a drop decision lane to allow 3 lanes to continue along I-480 past the exit gore, providing another lane of continuity along 480. And this only cost was just under $5 million. So think about the context of the project area and adjacent sections when thinking about PVPD opportunities. And the example in the upper right corner, does it make sense to improve shoulder widths and lane widths to meet standards for one of these horizontal curves but leave the others as is? You got to look at the crash history when answering this type of question. If the crashes are spread over the entire quarter, then look at the likely causes of the crashes and target the improvements to fix those. The image in the lower right corner is just to remind you that there can be multiple users of a facility. Giving too much emphasis to one user may degrade the function of other users. PVPD is not the same as value engineering, but the PVPD philosophy and VE process are complementary. A VE is an analysis of materials, processes, and products from which a selection may be made to achieve the required function at the lowest overall cost, consistent with the requirements for performance, reliability, and maintainability. PVPD is the overarching approach that guides planners, programmers, and engineers to focus on performance improvements that benefit both project and system needs. PVPD and VE share the similar goal of achieving the greatest benefit to cost ratio. However, VE typically focuses on the decision within a single project, while PVPD considers the decision within the context of improving the overall system. So there you have it, performance-based project development in a nutshell. Here's the key takeaways: the purpose and need, and clearly breaking the needs into primary and secondary needs is very important. Coordinating with the appropriate disciplines, offices, and process owners is critical to the success of the project. Documentation is key, and remember, it's not just design exceptions, but documenting any design variation that may not meet the required standards. And applying PVPD principles will help you develop a design that targets and fixes what is broken and allows for fundable improvements to be implemented. So thank you for your time, and Michelle, that is all I have.
Awesome, Brent, you are a man of your word. You were right on time. I mean, to the minute. And nice use of summary. So again, if I could just summarize what we've learned so far is focusing in on primary versus secondary safety needs. And again, there's more flexibility in the process, and in what Brent had talked about, more flexibility in the design process than we typically think. So our next 2 speakers are going to tag team it, and they're coming live from, I believe, the District 4 office. We have 2 speakers. The first one is going to be Chad. Chad Root is a graduate of the University of Akron and currently serves as a District 4 Capital Programs Administrator. Chad came to ODOT in 2010 as an LPA project manager and later served as LPA program manager. During his 6 years as LPA manager, he worked to simplify the LPA process and oversaw the delivery of 238 projects totaling $276 million. Chad has taken the same approach of simplifying the process and applied it to his role as district design engineer and capital programs administrator. The second speaker with Chad today is Dan Depto. He is a 1987 graduate of Penn State University, where he received a Bachelor of Science degree in engineering. He's worked for ODOT for over 28 years, currently serving as consultant manager in District 4, and he's held positions as project manager and design engineer in the district. And combined, these 2 gentlemen are going to talk about how we can rethink the PDP and how we can engage our utility partners in this process to deliver projects more quickly. So with that, I'll turn it over to you 2 gentlemen. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Michelle. As you can see, Danny and I are tag teaming this today, but I will start out and say I am merely just the appetizer in this conversation. Dan will go into detail as to how we as a district approach the utilities with our projects. I'd be a little remiss if I just didn't thank Brent for his presentation beforehand and him hitting on the PVPD and that approach. I think it has been so great for us as a department and us as a state on ORE's embracement of the PVPD and our ability to target improvements and right-size projects. I think it makes this conversation we are having on this seminar, which is rethinking how Ohio develops safety projects, I think it makes it much easier, where once again, we can target that area where we're seeing the safety concern, as opposed to that broader kind of blowing up the whole project thing. So I think with the PBPD approach, we're able to save not only cost, but we're also able to save time on a project. So the governor's top 150 project list, I think it gave us a unique opportunity to look at how we could accelerate projects. Now, with the governor's 150, we were all part of this, where we saw the full court press that the governor was putting on to get the gas user fee raised. And a few of the key things he hit were the preservation of our existing system, being able to have track projects again, and then the safety of our roadway. As much as we talk about some of the cars and how they're safer now, there are still some evidence on the roads that, you know, we can make some intersections safer. And the governor really drilled that point home. It was made very clear to us. And let me just start by saying Michelle had asked us to talk about, because I think with our philosophy at district, we were able to advance some projects quickly to kind of meet what the governor was looking for. And it was made clear to us early on that these projects had to be delivered quicker than our typical projects. Michelle let us know that Director Marchbanks was going to be meeting with the governor on a regular basis to talk about the delivery of these projects. And Michelle kicked it off by saying how 80% they wanted on the street by fiscal 22. That message was pounded to us over and over and over again. As we all know, who's on this call with ODOT and the consultants, is our projects take anywhere from 2, 3, 4 years to develop to get through that design, environmental, right-of-way, utility coordination project. So when you're talking 2 to 4 years and you're talking a governor that spent a good amount of that first year to get this done, you know, he's not seeing the fruits of those safety projects get on the street. So what could we do, or what was our approach as a district to accelerate these projects? So what we did as a district, knowing the importance of these projects, we came back and we set up internal meetings to discuss the scope and the schedule. Now, at this point in time, our scopes had already been developed, our countermeasures had already been developed, and we had approved schedules through the safety application process. So what we did was we got our people in a room. We got our project managers, our designers, our environmental staff, our utility staff, and our right-of-way staff, and said, listen, this is what we need to do. We need to start from the beginning. We need to look at the scopes. We need to look at the schedule. We need to find ways to cut time in from these projects. We need to really drill into these projects. The key thing we tried driving home is everyone in this room, you're a stakeholder in this project. You're a part of this project. You've been doing these projects for many years. So here we are. We know what we want to do. Let's sit down and let's try to drive how we can save time on our schedules. We had about 2 or 3 of these meetings. At the conclusion of our internal meetings, we saved an average of 1 year, anywhere from 15 months to 9 months on the overall completion of the construction of the project, which is what the governor was ultimately looking for. How quickly can we get these jobs on the street? So after our projects, or after our meetings, we were able to save a year off that entire process. For us as a district, our key time savers were, first of all, we wanted to utilize task orders. So what we wanted to do was we wanted to get the consultant we selected, when we got through and got them under contract, we wanted them to hit the ground running. So we used our task orders to get not only the survey done, but we took an educated guess on where we would need subsurface utility location done. So we got all that work out of the way. And this allowed us to have our designer hit the ground running. The other thing we wanted to do is how could we advance the right-of-way work? And how could we coordinate with the utility companies to advance that right work? So I'm not going to steal any of Dan's thunder. That's what Dan's going to get into on what we did as a district, but that was one of our priorities. As mentioned earlier, another thing we wanted to do was we wanted to procure our poles ahead of time such that when our contractor got the project, they had the poles and we wouldn't have to wait for that lead time. After going through that process, like I said, we saved about a year on our projects. Michelle May brought it up earlier, we had district workshops. Our District 4 workshop was on May 26th. And to be honest with you, we were kind of looking at it and not dreading it, but just looking at it like, man, what are we going to go through over all this? So we had completed our process ahead of that meeting. And when we got to our District 4 workshop on May 26th, it was an all-day event scheduled with multiple people from central office. We ended up completing ours in a little over an hour. And I think what the committee or what the group had seen in our workshop was we had already done our homework. We had already trimmed everything where we could. We had already looked at scope. We had looked at lane widths. We had looked at location of sidewalks. We had looked at the length of how long the turn lanes needed to be. And we had already broken all those things down and made them easier in our process. So our meeting went very quick. And I think that's what one of the things that led Michelle to ask us to speak is, it was more our district philosophy, and it's not just on these safety projects, but it's in all projects, is what can we do to not only save cost, but also save project schedule? Because the quicker we can get these jobs out on the road, the better it is for the traveling public. And what allowed us to do that is, it wasn't me saying, you're gonna do this, you're gonna do this, you're gonna do this. We pulled people like Dan in the room, and we had our environmental and right-of-way and our designers all in the room at the same time, and they all knew what the goal was. And doing these projects for as many years they have ideas in their head that could save time in the process. So we got these people in the room, and we just let them bounce ideas off each other, bounce ideas. And out of that is how we end up saving 1 year. I really do think it all comes down to philosophy in the end, and just taking the approach, whether it's a consultant or ODOT, and thinking about ways to accelerate the project and thinking that's actually a good thing. So I'm going to be passing it over to Dan, and Michelle gave you his bio, but having someone like Dan in the room, Dan has 30 years experience at Department of Transportation. He is a roadway specialist. When you kind of take when you just let Dan go and let him start popping ideas, it didn't necessarily have to be about the roadway that Dan gave ideas. What he's going to talk about today is something that he'll talk about for hours if you let him, and that's utilities. And over the years, the impact utilities can have on our project. So he's been having these things in his head, like there's better ways to do this, and that's what Dan's going to talk about right now. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Dan Depto.
Thank you very much, Chad.
And let me put
the slide back up.
Okay, it's here.
Okay, we can advance it to the next. There you go. The next one. Utilities are your friends. Chad, say it with me.
Utilities are your friends.
Okay, now everyone in the audience, say it with me. Utilities are your friends. Wow, that was pretty good. But I just didn't feel like all of you participated. Could it be just because some of you just don't believe this, because maybe you had some bad experience with utility companies in the past? Believe me, I get it, because I've been there myself. But what I've come to realize about utility companies is that their goals are not that different than ours. We both want projects that minimize impacts, so we don't have to spend a lot of time and money dealing with them, and we both value safety. So today I'm going to tell you about a few things District 4 is doing to engage our utility companies on some of our governor's top 150 projects. District 4 had 3 projects on the governor's top 150 list that we decided to put on the programmatic to have consultants design. On the September 2019 programmatic, we had Portage 82, which consists of the design of a single lane roundabout, and Stark 687, which consists of the design of 2 right turn lanes with a slight realignment of an intersection. And on January 2020 programmatic, we had Stark 172, which also consisted of design of 2 right turn lanes. Due to the limited time that I have today, I'm only going to talk about the Portage 82 and Stark 687 projects, since these projects are a little further in design, but we're also doing the same things on the Stark 172 project. Now, as many of you know, the governor's top 150 initiative is something that's very important to the governor. And since these projects will improve safety, he would like them to be constructed as soon as possible. So during the scoping of these projects, we developed project schedules that we thought would do just that. That brings us to our poll question. How many of you had a project schedule that you felt was pretty good, only to have your boss or client tell you that it wasn't? I'd like you to answer using one of the three choices: yes, no, or it doesn't matter because I don't listen to my boss anyway. Wow, that's pretty good. Wow. Yes, we had like 75%. Well, like many of you, I would have voted yes also because, as I mentioned, we felt pretty good about our schedule for the governor's top 150 projects until we got the dreaded Michelle May email. In this email, Michelle said that she was going to set up a meeting with every district to go over all the schedules for the governor's top 150 projects to see if we were working as smart as we can to deliver them. Now, before our meeting with Michelle, our district decided to have an internal meeting for us to take another look at our schedules. When we looked at the three projects that were under programmatics, we thought we were off to a pretty good start. As Chad mentioned during his talk, we utilized our task order consultants to get the survey and SOL's level B information. We also had safety studies that showed the conceptual alternative selected. Some other things we had going for us was, since these projects were intersection improvement projects, the project limits were relatively short in length, which meant there would be a small number of parcels that would be impacted. Also, the funding for these projects was such that we didn't have to wait until the environmental was cleared to begin right-of-way acquisition. So we began to look at the right-of-way schedule for these projects. And while doing this, a member of our right-of-way section said that since our right-of-way task force consultant does great work for our district, he felt comfortable skipping the development of the preliminary right-of-way plans and going straight to final right-of-way plans. So with that in mind, we decided to have the final right-of-way plans included with the stage 1 submission. Now, in order to do that, we knew we'd have to set the footprint of these projects early. As everyone knows, a major component in doing this is determining the right-of-way needed for utility relocations. So we knew that we'd have to begin our utility coordination a lot sooner than normal. So how do we do this? Next slide, please. We knew we needed to have the utility kickoff meeting, but we also knew we needed to provide utility companies with some information about the project beforehand, so the meeting would be productive. So we decided that we could send them some conceptual plans. Now, even before we decided to accelerate our right-of-way schedule, we already had our consultant scope to provide a conceptual alternative submission. In this submission, they took the conceptual alternative from the safety study and tweaked it based on the actual field survey and SOL's information that we now had to verify the results of the safety study. So we worked with our consultants to determine what else we could show on the conceptual plans. We wanted to provide as much information that we could, especially any proposed underground work, because we needed to have a place to start our right-of-way discussions with the utility companies so the kickoff meeting would be productive. So in the conceptual plans, we provided a preliminary storm system layout along with proposed signal and light pole locations. Based on that information, our consultants then set some preliminary right-of-way lines using their best judgment on the right-of-way needed for the project, as well as for any utility relocations they felt would be necessary. Along with that information, we sent a letter to establish the utility kickoff meeting. In this letter, we explained the importance of these projects. We also mentioned that since these projects were on an aggressive schedule, we had to determine the right-of-way needed for utility relocations as soon as possible. In order to do that, we asked the utility companies to come to the kickoff meeting prepared to answer three simple questions. Question number 1, are your facilities shown correctly in the preliminary drawings? Question number 2, based on the proposed work shown, will your facilities need to be relocated? And question number 3, if so, is the amount of proposed right-of-way shown in the preliminary drawings sufficient for you to relocate your facilities? Here's the information that was sent for the Stark 687 project. This is the utility kickoff letter. The first paragraph explains the importance of the governor's top 150 initiative. The next 2 paragraphs explain the project itself and the aggressive schedule. And near the end of the letter, we present the 3 questions that we want them to come to the kickoff meeting prepared to answer. This is the conceptual layout of the intersection. You can see the slight realignment of one lane of the intersection, as well as the pork chop islands for proposed right turn lanes. And although it's difficult to see, we have the location of our proposed mast arms, some preliminary drainage, and preliminary right-of-way lines. Our design consultant also provided cross sections. This is an example of one of the cross section sheets that was provided. As you can see, the cross sections show the existing underground utilities, as well as drainage features and the foundations for the mast arms and ped poles, which help the utility company see how the facilities would be impacted by the project. This is the information that was sent for the Portage 82 project. Once again, this is the utility kickoff letter, which is basically the same letter that was sent for the Stark 687 project, except of course for the project description. This is a conceptual alternative for the project. It shows the layout of the roundabout, and as you can see in the legend, we showed some preliminary right-of-way lines, the preliminary storm system, and the preliminary light pole locations. That brings us to the utility kickoff meeting itself. At the utility kickoff meeting, we wanted to make sure we discussed the following items: the project schedule, get the answers to the 3 questions that were asked in the kickoff letter, have an open discussion with each utility about their facilities, verify the utility contacts to make sure the information is being sent to the right person at the right address, and also find out what format each company would like to receive future plan submissions, and discuss the need for any test holes. When talking about the schedule, I like to provide the utility companies with the whole schedule to show how the project will be developed. I also like to highlight all the important dates that have utility involvement, such as the right-of-way dates, as well as dates for future meetings. As you can see, we have the kickoff meeting, followed by another meeting prior to the submission of stage 1 and final right-of-way plans. At this meeting, we want to provide an update on the design of the project and to touch base with the utilities again on the right-of-way needs. After the review of the stage 1 plans, we have another utility meeting. Now, this is probably the most important meeting on the schedule because it'll be the last time that we'll make adjustments to the proposed right-of-way limits for the project. I call it the Speak Now or Forever Hold Your Peace meeting. And as you can see, after this utility meeting, we finalize the right-of-way tracings and begin right-of-way acquisition. We also put a date for when we'd like the utility companies to submit the relocation plans, so they know this up front. And we also let them know when the right-of-way acquisition will be complete, so they know when they can begin their relocations. Even though the schedule shows that a draft utility notice to be submitted with the stage 3 plans, we decided to do something a little different with the utility notes for these projects. We decided to make the utility note a working document. What this means is that instead of providing separate meeting minutes after each meeting, we put the meeting minutes in the body of a standard utility note template, beginning with the utility kickoff meeting, include all other utility meetings after that. The thought was that this would be a good way to show the history of the discussions that were held with each utility company in a single location. We felt this would benefit not only the utility companies as they finalize their relocations, but also the consultants in writing the utility note and the district in reviewing it. This would also show the utility companies that the utility note will begin to be developed starting from our kickoff meeting, which would further emphasize the importance of their cooperation. Here's an example from our Portage 82 project. As you can see, the various utility meeting minutes are shown in a different color under each utility company. We also have a section that asks if right-of-way is necessary for this company to relocate its facility, which goes back to the 3 questions we asked during the utility kickoff meeting. And we also have a placeholder for when the utility company will begin their relocations and how long it will take. So what happens after a utility kickoff meeting? Based on the information gathered at the utility kickoff meeting, we obtain any test holes that are needed. During this time, there's a lot of back and forth between the consultants and the utility companies. Our consultants exchange information and have additional discussions with the utility companies, including field meetings when necessary. Our consultants also continue to develop the stage 1 and final right-of-way plans. Once the stage 1 and final right-of-way plans are completed, they're sent to all utility companies for review. Shortly after the review period is over, we have the Speak Now or Forever Hold Your Peace meeting that I mentioned earlier to finalize the proposed right-of-way needed for the project. After that, the project finalizes right-of-way tracings and begins right-of-way acquisition according to schedule. This is where I thought I would thank everyone who was involved with these projects for their help. But I didn't want it to sound like I was giving an Academy Award speech because after all, I didn't do the work. So I thought I'd rather hand out the Oscars to people who really deserve it. For the category of best performance by a utility company on the Portage 82 project, the Oscar goes to Brian Pound with First Energy, Mark Jackson with Charter Communications, Brian Vincent with Windstream, John Meerdink with Dominion, and Tim Riley with Northeast Ohio Gas. Let's face it, none of what our district was trying to do with accelerating the right-of-way schedule would be possible without the cooperation from these gentlemen. For the category of best performance by a utility company on a Stark 687 project, the Oscar goes to Paul Paxton with AEP, Ron Ickes with Charter Communications, Steve Hilton representing AT&T, Doug Smith with Dominion, and Jim Benicos with the City of Canton Water Department. Again, none of what our district was trying to do with these projects would be possible without the help from these gentlemen. For the category of best performance by a task order consultant, the Oscar goes to Brett Sloan with Survey and Mapping, who obtained the Level A and Level B soils information for these projects, and Frank Snyder with Thomas Folk and Associates, who obtained the field survey and also prepared the right-of-way plans. Now, Frank probably had the hardest jobs because by the time we finalized the right-of-way limits for these projects, he really didn't have much time to put the right-of-way plans together. For the category of best performance by a consultant project manager, the Oscar goes to Corey Lamb with CHA Companies for his work on Stark 687, and Mike Woodring with AECOM for his work on Portage 82, and Robert Sable with Environmental Design Group for his work on Stark 172. And even though we didn't talk about this project, Robert is doing a great job like Corey and Mike. These are the gentlemen that really made things happen. They bought into what we were trying to accomplish with these projects, and they did a great job coordinating with the utility companies and working with our task order consultant to get the right-of-way plans developed. And finally, for the category of best performance by District 4 staff, the Oscar goes to Elizabeth Stoper, who is a project manager for all three of these projects, Matthew Seal, our district utility coordinator, Brian Peck, our environmental specialist. And even though we didn't need to have environmental cleared for these projects to begin right-of-way acquisition, Brian jumped on these projects early to make sure there'd be no environmental issues. Tim Ward from our right-of-way department. Tim is the person that suggested we could skip the preliminary right-of-way submission and go straight to final right-of-way plans, which led us to try this process. And Laura Beese, our district design engineer. Laura's the person who came up with the idea to make the utility note a working document. These are the district folks that made trying something different on these projects possible. Well, that's all I have. I want to thank everyone for their time. And if you take only one thing away from this presentation, I hope that you remember, okay, let's say it one more time.
Utilities are your friends. I love it. I absolutely love it. Thank you. And I would also say utilities are your friends. And Dan, you did a really nice job of laying out some tools and techniques that people can use to specifically engage utilities in this process. And Chad, I want to thank you because it's a good reminder that when you encourage your experts to explore new ideas, you get different results. So thank you both for that. Next, we are going to transition to ODOT's Bowtie Bandit, and you'll see here in just a moment, Drew Gilmore. And thank you for that one, Paula. That's a great nickname. It's got a lot of stickiness to it. Once again, while we're transitioning over, make sure that you put questions in the question box so that we can try and address them at the end of the presentation. So Drew is the administrator of the Office of Real Estate, which is responsible for policy, training, and support across all real estate disciplines for ODOT, local public agencies, and consultants. Drew has worked for ODOT in various capacities within ODOT real estate for over a decade. He also has a BA in communications from The Ohio State University, a JD from the University of Cincinnati College of Law, and is a graduate of both the National Transportation Leadership Institute and National Transportation Advanced Leadership Institute from Indiana University, Purdue University, Indianapolis. That's a mouthful. Anyway, Drew, why don't you tell us about managing right-of-way risks?
Absolutely. Thank you, Michelle. So first off, I'm Drew Gilmore, Administrator of the Office of Real Estate and Central Office, and just very thankful to have the opportunity to be here as part of this group to represent and share the result of the work that a lot of folks in my office and outside of real estate put together to be able to help in this the effort to be able to deliver the Governor's 150 projects as soon as we possibly could. So like Michelle said, I want to talk about some good risk-based options, and here we go. And there are going to be a couple of them that we want to talk about, but some of them are not especially new. So let's get going. So as I look through the attendee list, I recognized there are definitely a number of right-of-way staff that are out there that are attending today, but I think most of the audience of over 800 folks here this morning is more engineering, project managers, and other expertise. So So I think when we're trying to understand what the right-of-way process is, I think we're in the right place here. So how does right-of-way acquisition actually work? Well, if you're like some, you may feel like right-of-way acquisition takes up a bunch of time on your schedule, but what is right-of-way actually doing over there? You get your right-of-way plans, you go ahead and you send them over to real estate, and then 12, 18 months later, something happens, they talk to some folks, and then boom, you get your right-of-way certification. So what you may be thinking is, what happened over there? Why did it take so long? What's going on? We just needed some temporary easements, or we just needed some easements. Why did it take so long? Well, I think the question is, why is right-of-way acquisition so complicated? Well, simple, or well, maybe not so simple. It's all about the rules. When there's any federal money in any aspect of a project, we're obligated to follow all of the federal laws that are in the Uniform Act. So is it that simple? Just don't use the federal money and we can do whatever we want? Well, it's not that simple either. See, we're still subject to all the state laws. And for the most part, the Ohio Revised Code and the Ohio Administrative Code mirror pretty much what's in the Uniform Act. So in order to understand and implement all the laws, we have a robust set of policies and procedures. And I should mention that the state law doesn't just apply to ODOT, it applies to any entity, any agency that's trying to acquire land by use of eminent domain. So the other thing here we've got is, well, here's some context. We've got a chart that kind of shows some of the manual counts. Just so you notice, real estate's over on the left, right? So there's a lot to keep in mind. So here's one of the big questions that we always get with the 150 projects on any project. Can we do it faster? Maybe. Speed is really dependent on a lot of project-specific factors. You've got to think about the parcel count, the staffing capacity, the complexity of takes. There could be ownership issues. Perhaps some of the owners are deceased, or we can't locate them. Relocations are also going to add complication to it. So I think the better question to ask in this context is, can we do it sooner? So I wanted to highlight at least two opportunities that we want to talk to about being able to move right away forward in the process. And there's one that I want to highlight and go into a little bit more detail. But both of these options really have in common that the right-of-way acquisition process starts earlier in the project. And what do I mean by earlier? I mean, it's going to happen before the NEPA document is completed. But there are differences beyond just the funding source. So the first option we call federally funded early acquisition. This process is great because it gives you the opportunity to preserve all of the federal funding for right-of-way acquisition. This gives you added time to be able to complete parcels. Maybe they're going to take longer. Maybe they're a complicated take. Maybe there's a relocation on that parcel. But we think this might be most useful when you believe that the property owners are already on board with the project. But it's not all good news. This does come with some limitations. First, Federal Highway has to agree to this type of project. The individual parcels still that are going to be acquired still need to go through low-level environmental clearance, and you can't relocate the utilities. There are also some additional quirks on relocation parcels, and perhaps the biggest restriction is that you can't use eminent domain. And what that means in our context is that we may not be able to guarantee a specific date that right-of-way is going to be acquired. And it gets a little bit more complicated. And if that's something you're thinking you want to look into, please connect with your real estate staff. And I should mention that about 2 years ago, we actually presented on this specific topic at OTEC. So it's been out there for a while. We've done, I think, about 10 of these federally funded early acquisitions statewide. So the second option is what I really want to talk about today. So this past year, when real estate was tasked with identifying opportunities where real estate could help get the 150 safety projects delivered as soon as possible, the big difference with the 150 projects made us start looking at our policy and procedure and start asking some questions. So we didn't just do it alone. We connected with districts, and we connected with Chief Legal and the AG's office, and it gave us some ideas, because when you're dealing with projects, specifically these 150, where we got more state funds available and the flexibility to actually use all state funds in the right-of-way phase, it let us be more creative. So specifically, by using those state funds in the right-of-way process, we don't have to wait for the NEPA clearance to start the process. But the thing to note is that all other parts of the acquisition work, they're just the same. It's the same as if we were doing it our normal process. We follow all the same process, which includes being able to use eminent domain. One thing to be clear, though, is that just because there isn't federal money in the right-of-way, there can be federal money in other parts of the project, just not that right-of-way phase. So we really like this opportunity because we think it's a great process, because it gives you more control. You don't have to have that federal highway approval. And again, you can guarantee that right-of-way clearance date, just the same as a typical project. So we see the biggest benefit here is the opportunity to compress that project schedule down. But again, this isn't perfect either. You still have to have the right project where this is actually going to add value to the project. Not all projects are going to have the access to be able to put only state funds in the right-of-way phase. Also, trying to create a compressed schedule may create some additional risks that you need to consider on non-residential relocation cost estimates, and you might even have some additional costs with title work. The other thing is that not all project schedules are really going to have a need to have that right-of-way delivered earlier, so adding additional financial risk and project management complexity might not end up adding value. So it's not necessarily something that we're going to look to do on every project. So I've got an example. This is a very recent example of this concept in action. In fact, this plan package just went to central office last week. So this is a safety project. It's a rural intersection. It's at a skew. There's some sight distance issues, and there are some hills you can kind of see off in the distance there. The total project estimate was about $1 million for this project, and they wanted to pursue the aggressive schedule because they needed to get it sold in fiscal year 21. But more importantly, they wanted to get this project built as soon as possible. As you've heard, as you're aware, getting these safety projects built as soon as possible is a high priority for the governor, for this administration, for ODOT. So in this project, you can see the construction and sale dates were set, and then they kind of worked backwards to kind of develop the rest of the schedule. So for context on this project, there is right-of-way acquisition. There's about 7 parcels, and they're all fairly simple takes. It's kind of, you saw, it's kind of rural farmland type takes. So in the schedule, they had built in 120 days to actually do the right-of-way acquisition. And they got that started back in June, and they got to finish up in mid-October. And coincidentally, NEPA was cleared right about the same time that right-of-way was finishing. So if that timetable put the project on track to sell in January and then get built in this coming spring. But if we'd gone the traditional route, you can already do the math. It may have actually made it to sale in fiscal 21, but the opportunity to have that project built this spring, it wasn't certain. It may have delayed a construction season. That would have added time, it would have added cost, and delayed the implementation of a needed safety improvement. So before I talk about some of the keys, I do want to kind of circle back to a point that Scott had brought up in the beginning about design build. Design build is still an option, but we see the only real difference is about the NEPA process that when you'd be able to start those projects. So all the same risk factors that you would take into account when doing a design build project would make sense. It'd just be about understanding if you did do the state funding that you'd be able to start that acquisition process prior to the NEPA document. But otherwise, the same the risk analysis would apply. But back to talking about the tips for success on the projects on these acquisitions prior to NEPA. We think the keys for this process are really about picking the right projects and getting your real estate office involved early on. The ideal projects are going to have little or no relocation and be primarily simple takes. But the most important piece is that you need to connect with your real estate people. In district, please talk to your real estate administrators to get them involved to evaluate these projects. And for LPAs, please call your ODOT LPA liaison officer or talk to your real estate administrator and see if this project, these processes are going to make sense for you. So thank you for the opportunity. Look forward. I think we're all going to take questions as a group. I think, is that right, Michelle?
We are, Drew. We are. Thank you. Thank you for that. So let's bring back all of our speakers. And we are going to try and, so we've got a hard stop at 11:30 because people got to move on, probably 11:29, to other perhaps OTEC sessions. So let's take some quick questions. I will start backwards. Do you find, this is for Drew, do you find that temporary takes are sometimes complex, or can they generally be assumed to be non-complex? What is an example of a complex temporary take if you have one?
Sure. So immediately when we start talking about complexities of temporary takes, the first thing that springs to my mind would be temporary affecting of like parking lots, when you're going to take some of the parking away, you know, for 3, 6, 9 months, and kind of the effect that that is going to end up having on the owner, the business that's there. Sometimes that's going to add a lot of complexity to how much that's going to be worth, the disruption to the business and things like that. So it's not impossible, but again, it's going to be very fact specific on, you know, did they have excess parking or were they already at 2? I know that there's actually a project in District 2 where that parking issue is the exact issue at hand, where eliminating the parking for a clinic for the duration of the project, are they able to continue to operate during that time? So it's definitely something that that you need to get your real estate staff directly involved in, because it can be a big deal, even though it's only 6 months and it's only 2 spots. So good question.
I'm going to throw the next one to Chad. How many safety projects were allocated to District 4? Did the safety program affect the progress of other projects in the district?
So with that round, we had 6 safety projects, and then we've had some subsequent projects. Did it affect our delivery? No, we still delivered everything else. Dan, running the consultant section, I think does a real good job of, you know, mixing the project up with our project managers. For these particular projects, Elizabeth Sober managed all of them for our section, which actually helped in what Dan was doing with utility coordination, just in that she was that singular person with him and with our utility staff who was managing it through. So we didn't have to redo it every time. So it hasn't had that effect on us of pushing any other projects back. We've been able to absorb the safety projects.
Yeah, and I will admit, from a global level, there is no question we've put a tremendous amount of pressure on our district offices to deliver safety projects more quickly in the environment of they have all these other projects. But again, people have really risen to the occasion, and you know, it is a testament to when you let the experts brainstorm out some different ways to engage project development. They will come up with some innovative and really good answers. So I'm going to give the next one to Scott Knable. How did you avoid the requirements of ADA in the intersection example of not adding curb ramps and push buttons?
That is a good question. The feeling was that with the ADA requirements, the primary need was to access the buttons that would be typically required for signalization. So with the elimination of buttons, we did add pedestrian signal heads and provided the adequate timing for crossings, such that if pedestrians were present at the intersection, they would have the opportunity to cross. So from an ADA accommodation perspective, the revised design or the new safety project was an improvement over the existing condition, which did not have those facilities for all legs of the intersection.
Okay. Dan, this question's for you. How did you get the utilities to stay on schedule?
A lot of communication. I mean, every meeting we have with them, the first thing we talk about is the schedule. We always know where we're at, and we keep hounding the schedule to them. It's just a lot of cooperation, a lot of communication. I know ODOT talks about communication a lot, but this doesn't work if you don't effectively communicate and know what the goals and what everybody's supposed to do and when they're supposed to do it.
Okay, thank you.
I think Dan and I were talking this morning just about utilities in general, and you know, the COVID thing and being at home and doing OTEC like this, like we'd much rather be together and all that type of thing. But I do think we've learned some things, and I think there are some advantages in utility companies with the amount of projects they have going on between the locals and ODOT and just their own work. It's a lot of work. So I think it's been a little bit of benefit to them when we can set up some virtual meetings and they don't have to drive to Akron, which might be a half hour, 45 minutes, and then drive back. So I think we've helped them a little bit by saving some time. I think we've seen a little bit of benefit of that.
Gotcha, thank you. This one is probably for me, from Aaron Behrman. Will safety be funding the districts for additional temporary construction staff, i.e. consultant construction staff? It's certainly something that we can discuss. I think there has been a willingness on behalf of executive management and our own staff to consider supplementing staff. But it's something that we would have to talk about on a case-by-case basis. You know, there will not be unlimited dollars for this effort, but can definitely talk about it. How about for Chad? What did you feel was the most important thing to consider when reducing schedules for the safety projects?
Trying to minimize right-of-way impacts. So looking at our projects, looking at the scopes, could we skinny it up a little bit? Like I said, could we bring in a sidewalk? Could we minimize a right-hand turn lane length that might not impact a driveway as much? You know, we have conversations about right-of-way, and Drew talked about right-of-way, but the second you introduce right-of-way in a project, you're a minimum of 6 months to a year to a project. So if you can minimize that or get out of at least a partial take and get them down to temporaries, I think that simplifies the process. And even further than that, a $300 temporary that's simple, and now I'm going to go into cost, not just time, but a $300 temp in the end still costs us, ODOT, the same amount as if we were buying property from the person. So if we can design something and even minimize those temporaries, we save on schedule and we save on cost. So those were the key things we tried to hammer home.
Okay, we've got time for a couple more questions. Hey, by the way, I think Brent is lonely in his Hollywood Square box, so send in a question for design. In the meantime, we will go to Drew. Drew, other than the fact that you have a very nice clean real estate in your background, which we know the secret is off to the left or the right, how is the decision made to use state funds in right-of-way acquisition?
Well, from our perspective, very, very welcomely. So when we talk about that, it's really the risk, balancing the risk versus you know, how much money we really have. Typically, you know, we're putting all that federal money into those type of projects. On these projects, for the most part, they are smaller takes. They are less expensive things. So the risk question is we're putting fewer state dollars out there potentially for this. So it's the idea of the added risk of those state dollars versus the amount of the money that we're actually going to put out. So there's a researcher from Rutgers. His name's Peter Sandman. He gives us a formula for risk. He talks about risk is the hazard plus outrage. So in this case, the hazard is what is the risk, what is the hazard of doing something wrong? You know, it could be losing federal funding. The outrage is how upset are people going to be at kind of losing the funding. So in our world, losing federal funding is a huge concern, something we would not want to do. So so shifting over, putting that hazard more on the state dollars, that's something that makes sense on these lower cost ones to be able to gain that benefit of being able to do the projects on time.
Yeah, and I will chime in as a program manager managing a pot of funds. It is all about how badly you want to finish that project quickly and how much the cost it is to do it. Is it worth it? Okay, I think we have time maybe for one more question. Let's see, any advice on translating these great project shortcuts to regional and local projects, like making friends with utilities as well as other processes? Any advice on regional and local projects? Anyone want to jump in? Melee. Nope.
Well, I'll just say real quick, on the real estate side, we have documented our process. It's on our website. And like I said, you can, if you don't know how to navigate there, just directly connect with your district real estate contact and they'll help you get through the process.
Hey, I got one for Brent. This is the last one, Brent. How is performance-based design different from context-sensitive design? In 1 minute.
Yeah, no, I think the context sensitive is just it's part of it. You know, a few of the slides I touched on, context is part of the PVPD process and considering what type of alternative or solution that you can apply to your different project. So what type of corridor are you in? Is it urban? Is it rural? The right-of-way, environmental impacts, and those different things. So I think that the context sensitive is part of PVPD.
Gotcha. Thank you. So this is it. Thank you to our presenters today. Thank you to the ODOT staff who participated in the workshops, and thank you for everything you're doing every single day to deliver these projects faster. And thank you to Paula for running a tight GoToWebinar meeting. So with that, enjoy the rest of your day. I appreciate everything you do. Goodbye.